Hello, dear students. Welcome to this explanation of the little match girl. I hope you're all healthy and taking very good care of yourselves. Let us quickly begin the lesson, but before that, a request. Please subscribe to the channel and press the like button if you find the video useful. Let us begin with the introduction to the author. Hans Christian Andersen was a Danish writer, best known for his fairy tales. Danish means that he was from Denmark. His stories are not restricted to children alone and have themes of universal appeal that transcend age and culture. This means that even though the stories may appear to be simple and written for children, even adults can enjoy and learn from them. Readers from not only the West but from all over the world can relate to the themes in his works. Andersen had a very unhappy childhood, and much of his stories reflect this sadness, dealing with loss and death. The Little Match Girl is also one such story. Set around Christmas, the story tells of a little girl who, unable to sell her matchsticks, dies of cold and hunger on the street, even as people are celebrating the birth of the Christ child inside their warm, cozy homes. The tale is rich in irony, imagery, and symbols, emphasizing the need for compassion for those who have so much less than we do. So, we will discuss the irony, imagery, and symbols as we read the text. Let us look at the story in brief. It is the evening of New Year's Eve, that is 31st December. A little girl is walking all alone on the streets. She is barefoot, hungry, and cold. She has been trying to sell matches with no success. Everyone is ignoring her since they are too busy either celebrating inside their homes or they are on their way to some place for the celebrations. The child is too frightened to go home since her father is sure to beat her for not earning even a single penny. She walks all alone in the streets and then huddles in a corner. Desperately cold and hungry, she begins lighting her matches to get some relief from the cold. She lights the first match and imagines a great iron stove and the warmth that it provides. Then she lights the second match, and this time she imagines a table laden with delicious food and wishes she could have some. She lights the third match and imagines a beautiful Christmas tree and then spots a star falling in the sky. She lights the fourth match and sees her grandmother. She immediately cries out that she wants to be with her granny. In a bid to keep her granny with her, she lights up all the matches one by one. Her granny takes her in her arms and they both fly away from the earth towards heaven. The next morning, that is, on New Year's Day, people passing by see the poor little girl lying dead in the street and they conclude that she must have frozen to death in the cold. They see the burnt matches and infer that she had been trying to warm herself. But they have no idea of the beautiful visions that she has seen and the fact that now she is far away in the lap of God, away from this cruel world. Let us now look at the story in detail. It was bitterly cold, snow was falling, and darkness was gathering, for it was the last evening of the old year. It was New Year's Eve. So that means it was the last day of the year. In the cold and gloom, a poor little girl walked, bareheaded and barefoot, through the streets. She had been wearing slippers, it is true, when she left home. But what good were they? They had been her mother's. So you can imagine how big they were. The little girl had lost them as she ran across the street to escape from two carriages that were being driven terribly fast. So this means that she had been trying to cross the street when suddenly she saw two carriages coming very fast. So naturally, she tried to run quickly, and in the process, her slippers came off since they were too big for her. But what happened after the carriages had gone by? She should have found her slippers, but no, one slipper could not be found, and a boy had run off with the other, saying that it would come in very handy as a cradle some day when he had children of his own. So this means one slipper was lost and the other was taken away by the unknown boy who teased her and bullied her in this manner. Now, why did he do that? Because he saw that she was alone and defenseless. She was too weak. She was a soft target. So, this boy represents the unthinking, unfeeling, cruel side of humans. The boy just made fun of the fact that she was wearing such big slippers. It was entertaining for him, and he did not even consider what would she do barefoot in the cold. So the little girl walked about the streets on her naked feet, which were red and blue with the cold, naturally because of poor blood circulation. In her old apron, she carried a great many matches, and she had a packet of them in her hand as well. Nobody had bought any from her, and no one had given her a single penny all day. She crept along, shivering and hungry, the picture of misery, poor little thing. So why was she selling matches? Because begging for money was illegal, and especially in the poor section of society, being cruel to children was rampant. The picture of misery. This means that anyone who looked at her should have spotted her wretched condition. It was too obvious to be missed, but still nobody had time or consideration for her. So as a result, no one bought any of her matchsticks, no one gave her even a single penny. Poor little thing. This shows that she was too insignificant for the rest of the world around her. The snowflakes fell on her long golden hair, which curled so prettily about her neck. But she did not think of her appearance now. Lights were shining in every window, and there was a glorious smell of roast goose in the street. For this was New Year's Eve, and she could not think of anything else. So, in this paragraph, the author shows us his compassionate point of view about the girl. He looks beyond her poverty and tells us that she had long golden hair with pretty curls and the snowflakes fell on it. So he doesn't describe her just like any, urchin child or a beggar child. No, he tells us that she was beautiful. With this description, he equates her with just about any other child, worthy of care, attention, and consideration. She was hungry and it was New Year's Eve. She saw the shining lights, which means people were celebrating. She smelt delicious roast goose, which emphasizes how hungry she must have been feeling. And naturally, after the long day in the bitter cold, she had no strength left. She huddled down in a heap in a corner formed by two houses, one of which projected further out into the street. But though she tucked her little legs up under her, she felt colder and colder. So, such a corner where one of the walls is slightly projecting out into the street, such a corner would probably just give you the illusion of warmth. It would not actually provide any. So, it was a very poor way to shelter herself. But then she had no other option. She just tried to hold her body together by crouching and by making herself as small as possible, tucking her legs under her, huddling out there. But it was of no use because it was freezing out there. She did not dare to go home, for she had sold no matches and earned not a single penny. Her father would be sure to beat her. And besides, it was so cold at home, for they had nothing but the roof above them, and the wind whistled through that, even though the largest cracks were stuffed with straw and rags. So only the largest cracks were stuffed with straw and rags, not all the cracks. And even that was ineffective. So this tells us how bad the situation was at home. She would get neither physical nor emotional comfort or love or security there. Her father would just beat her for not earning, and the house was also in such a poor condition. They could not even afford to repair the roof. So they were indeed very, very poor. So she preferred to stay in the street. At least she would escape her father's beating over there. Her thin hands were almost numb with cold. If only she dared pull just one small match from the packet, strike it on the wall, and warm her fingers. So she had no strength left to sustain herself against the cold, and she became desperate to warm her fingers. Now, she was supposed to sell the matchsticks, not use them for herself. But somehow, in desperation, she could not resist thinking that let me take one, just one small match and warm myself. She pulled one out. Scratch! How it spluttered and burnt. The author deliberately describes this in detail, even giving us a feel of the sound and the process of the match burning. The exclamation mark tells us what relief she must have felt, even at the little flame of that little matchstick. It had a warm, bright flame, like a tiny candle, when she held her hand over it. But what a strange light! So, why was the light strange? Because it seemed to the little girl as if she was sitting in front of a great iron stove with polished brass knobs and brass ornaments. So, since she was so poor, a stove or a room heater, as we might understand it, would seem such a luxury to her. She imagined it and she tried to fight the cold with the imaginary warmth. The fire burnt so beautifully and gave out such a lovely warmth. Oh, how wonderful that was! The child had already stretched her feet to warm them too, when out went the flame. The stove vanished, and there she sat with the burnt match in her hand. So the match just burnt out, and she too came back to reality. It was only momentary. In the glow of that little matchstick that she had started to actually imagine warmth to such an extent that she even stretched out her legs in front of her. So that is really indeed a very, very touching sight to imagine. She had come back to reality, but it was so cold, and she had been so comforted by the vision of the stove that she struck another. It burned clearly, and where the light fell upon the wall, the bricks became transparent, like gauze. So, this was the second vision or imagination that she had. She was a miserable, hungry child, struggling all alone in the cold outside. But now she imagined what was happening through the brick wall inside the house where people must have gathered for a sumptuous dinner. She could see right into the room where a shining white cloth was spread on the table. It was covered with beautiful china, and in the center of it stood a roast goose stuffed with prunes and apples, steaming deliciously. So there was a brand new spotless white tablecloth, and on it an invitingly laid table, and hot, nutritious, delicious food ready to eat. And what was even more wonderful was that the goose hopped down from the dish, waddled across the floor with carving knife and fork in its back, and waddled straight up to the poor child. So this is exactly like something that you might watch on a cartoon channel in a cartoon movie. This was actually a dream come true. Imagine the food is ready, the roast goose, it is already cooked, and then it just hops off the table. It walks in that funny goose like motion. It walks straight up to her as if to tell her that, okay, here I am in front of you, cooked and ready. You can eat me if you like. So that's a wonderful prospect for a hungry child. But then out went the match, and nothing could be seen but the thick, cold wall. So once again, as the match went out, she had to face the bitter reality. There was no food and no warmth for her. It was getting colder and colder, and she was really struggling to stay warm. She struck another match, and suddenly she was sitting under the most beautiful Christmas tree. It was much larger and much lovelier than the one she had seen last year through the glass doors of the rich merchant's house. 1,000 candles lit up the green branches, and gaily colored balls like those in the shop windows looked down upon her. So, in these lines, the author has once again shown us how remote and inaccessible beautiful things that well to do people take for granted were for this poor child. She was a child just like any other, and it was natural for her to be attracted to and to desire these things. They would bring joy to her. but because she was poor, she was deprived of them. The words glass door, rich merchant, and those in the shop windows emphasize this fact. So now when she saw this Christmas tree in her imagination, she wanted to touch it, she wanted to access it. So the little match girl reached forward with both hands. Then out went the match. So once again, the fire was out. But strangely, this time the vision continued. This means that slowly she was succumbing to the cold. She was drifting away from the world. So, as the vision continued, what did she see next? The many candles on the Christmas tree rose higher and higher through the air, and she saw that they had now turned into bright stars. One of them fell, streaking the sky with light. So the vision continued, and in her mind's eye, she saw that the Christmas tree that she was imagining, from there, the candles just rose up into the sky. They turned into stars, and then one of the stars broke and it just colored the sky with light. Now someone is dying, said the little girl, for her old grandmother, the only one who had ever been good to her, but who was now dead, had said, whenever a star falls, a soul goes up to God. So it is ironical that it was actually she who was dying, but she did not know it. She saw the vision change, the candles turn into bright stars, the star falling, and the light coloring the sky. It was a beautiful vision, and she remembered her grandmother. So the thought gave her solace because her granny represented the love and care that ought to have been hers, but was sadly missing in her life. She struck another match on the wall. Once more there was light, and in the glow stood her old grandmother, oh, so bright and shining, and looking so gentle, kind, and loving. So her grandmother, who had passed away before, her grandmother who was dead, was now in front of her. Granny, cried the little girl, oh, take me with you. I know you will disappear when the match is burnt out. You will vanish like the warm stove, the lovely roast goose, and the great glorious Christmas tree. So these words are words of such longing, such suffering, such disappointment. They tell us that there is no hope for this little girl in life. She's not going to get the basic joys that she wishes for and which ought to be hers. She has put up with the disappearance of warmth, food, and joy. But she desperately wants to hold on to the security of being loved by her granny. Then she quickly struck all the rest of the matches she had in the packet, for she did so want to keep her grandmother with her. Now, a practical person or an onlooker might simply think that she was desperate to stay warm. That is why she was striking the matches quickly one after the other. That is true, but over here the author poetically shows us how intensely she held on to the lovely vision of her granny as she lay dying in the street. The matches flared up with such a blaze that it was brighter than broad daylight. So the way the matches lit up, although it was night, it became as bright as day. At least this is what it seemed like to her, because she was now quickly striking one match after another in order to keep the flame going. And her old grandmother had never seemed so beautiful or so stately before. Stately over here means elegant, and it signifies an otherworldly and angel like aspect. And this tells us that her granny was not of this earth but of heaven now. She took the little girl in her arms and flew with her high up, oh, so high towards glory and joy. Now they knew neither cold, nor hunger, nor fear, for they were both with God. So the people of this world had been insensitive to their sufferings as long as they were alive. But now they were far away from these sufferings because they were dead and they were now with God. But in the cold dawn, in the corner formed by the two houses, sat the little girl with rosy cheeks and smiling lips, dead, frozen to death on the last evening of the old year. The dawn of the new year rose on the huddled figure of the girl. She was still holding the matches, and half a packet had been burnt. So the next morning, the people found the dead body of the little match girl. She was still sitting in a huddled position with a smile on her lips, and she looked beautiful in death. So her soul had gone up to heaven, but her body was still on the earth. It was lying on the street. So this is a very, very powerful, a very, very pathetically powerful image. The old year had been a year of suffering for her on this earth in her physical body, which means in her life. She had been able to strike only half a packet of matches before she died of the cold. So it may have seemed that, she was lighting up one match after the other. She must have lit so many matches, but actually she had struck only half a packet of matches. She was evidently trying to warm herself, people said. But no one knew what beautiful visions she had seen, and in what a blaze of glory she had entered with her dear old grandmother into the heavenly joy and gladness of a new year. So, through these lines, the author conveys that the people of the society did not know her condition then, and they did not know her condition now. They were not even ashamed of their insensitivity. They did not even have the sensibility to think that in death she had found joy and escape from her harsh life, which is something that society needs to understand, needs to be ashamed of. This is conveyed by the word evidently. She was evidently trying to warm herself. So they had never looked beyond the evident or obvious. Their circle of awareness was very narrow. But at the moment of death, the poor girl had seen beautiful sights. And now she was in a new year, happy in her new life, which came to her in the form of death. Whatever she could not experience on earth in her physical body, she would now get in heaven as in the form of a soul. Through this story, the author shows how selfish and insensitive human beings can be. It was New Year's Eve. People had been celebrating the birth of Jesus, who himself had been born in a horse's stable on a cold wintry night. His parents too had been turned away from all the places where they had sought shelter, and they finally had to spend the night in the stable. Jesus taught charity, love, and compassion. And celebrating Christmas and New Year means to celebrate these virtues. But people were too caught up in their lives and their self centeredness. They were focused only on the festivities of the occasion. They did not truly do what Jesus would have wanted them to do, which means they should have been showing love, compassion, and charity to the poor and needy. But they failed to do that. In the story, the stove represents warmth, shelter, and protection. The roast goose represents food that can give relief from hunger and sustain life. The Christmas tree represents all the joys and gifts of life, which everyone has the right to enjoy, not only rich people. And lastly, the grandmother represents love.